Ladies and gentlemen, I am your host Jeffrey Lazarus, and you are watching The Gaming Vector. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at the newly announced Xbox One and do some early comparisons against Sony's PlayStation 4. We're going to take a look at what we know about both consoles in an attempt to develop an informed opinion. Now, a quick disclaimer before we start. I will not be showing any footage from the Sony or Microsoft press events due to possible legal and copyright issues. So at any point where I do not have images directly related to what I'm speaking about, I'll be offering up footage from various multi-platform titles from the current generation of hardware. If you're interested in seeing both companies' press events, they will be linked in the description below this video. With that out of the way, let's jump right into our direct comparison, starting with the technical specifications for both consoles. Let's start out by looking at the raw numbers for both machines. Both the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One will come with the AMD Jaguar 8-core processor running at an estimated 1.6 GHz and will be loaded with 8 GB of RAM. From that standpoint, they appear to be very evenly matched, but the Xbox One is using 2133 MHz DDR3 RAM, while the PlayStation 4 is using 5500 MHz GDDR5 RAM. Without diving into too many technical details and relative unknowns, what this means is that the PlayStation 4 will most likely outpower the Xbox One, but will also be more costly of the two consoles, much like the last generation. This becomes even more apparent when we look at the graphical processing of both units. The Xbox One uses 768 GPU cores, while the PlayStation 4 uses 1152 GPU cores. This gives the PlayStation 4 approximately 33% more graphical processing power than the Xbox One. While Microsoft has announced a 500GB internal hard drive, Sony has yet to reveal their storage capacity. However, we know that both consoles will utilize USB 3.0, which means that external secondary storage devices are likely. Both devices will also utilize Blu-ray drives and are otherwise very similar in most aspects. What all of this means is that the PlayStation 4 will most likely be the more powerful and more expensive console of the two come this holiday season. Both Sony and Microsoft have decided to innovate on their current control methods with their next console iterations. Both controllers are immediately recognizable as upgrades of their previous incarnations, but what exactly are the innovations of each controller? We'll start out looking at Sony's DualShock 4. Sony has designed their new controller with input from the likes of Naughty Dog and Media Molecule, tuning the sensitivity of the analog sticks and trigger buttons, as well as adding a new, more ergonomic design to the triggers themselves. Sony has also added a touchpad to the center of the controller, adding an entirely new interface to their existing tech. Sony has also added a light bar to the top of each controller, much like the lights on their previous Move controller, that will allow their console to read not only movements, but positioning of various players within the room. Microsoft, on the other hand, has added a larger and hopefully longer-lasting integrated battery. Along with that, they have redesigned their directional pad, which has been a sticking point on 360 controllers for years, as well as redesigning their analog sticks and generally redesigning the controller for more ergonomic fit. Microsoft has also added vibrating impulse triggers, which will allow for a more nuanced feedback system, as well as allowing developers to include things such as brake resistance to racing titles or trigger brakes for shooters. Microsoft has also decided to double down on its Kinect sensor, adding what appears to be a more accurate voice control, as well as much more precise motion detection. It would appear that Sony has dedicated themselves to a much more controller-driven experience, while Microsoft is trying to integrate motion, voice, and controller into one cohesive experience. Finally, let's dig into some of the bigger features of the two consoles. Starting again with Sony, it appears that PS Vita Remote Play will be available for all PS4 games and will work on day one. This is a potential boon for PS Vita owners, as this could make the Vita an integral part of the PlayStation 4 experience. On top of that, the PlayStation 4 will also allow for self-publishing of games, which could be seen as both an upside and a drawback. Self-publishing will allow for more independent developers to see their games hit the console market and possibly garner more revenue and innovation, as is often seen in the PC market. The drawback is that it could potentially become the same cluttered mess as the Xbox 360's indie games section, and without proper promotion by Sony themselves, these titles could sit in the PlayStation Store without selling a single copy. On the Microsoft side of things, the Xbox One intends to seamlessly integrate television, movies, music, and games into one media hub. A great innovation for families, as well as a great innovation for those of us who do not have devices such as smart TVs. The biggest feature/downside for the Xbox One is the rumors swirling about used games. Let's break down what we know as fact. The Xbox One will require installation of games to the hard drive in order to play, but once the game is installed, it can be played by that profile on any console and can be played without the disc. We also know that Microsoft has accounted for family members in the household being able to play games that have been purchased and installed. We also know that the Xbox One has been designed to enable consumers to trade and resell games at retail. However, we do not know if this is through some sort of retail partnership with a company like GameStop or through an online pass type feature that many companies have been using to curb used game sales. The final issue with the Xbox One is the online versus offline debate. Supposedly, games will work offline without an issue and will sync to the cloud when you reconnect, and the Xbox One will need to connect to Microsoft servers once every 24 hours to sync, which could become an issue for particular demographics. Both companies have also opted to remove backwards compatibility from their respective consoles. While this has many people somewhere between irritated and downright outraged, what we should all try to remember is that emulation of older games on newer consoles costs more money and drives the price of the console higher. By removing backwards compatibility, both companies cut their own costs, which will hopefully mean that the consumer will be looking at lower price points all around. With all of the known features of both consoles, it looks as though we have two companies building similar machines for very different demographics. Sony seems to be positioning themselves as a console designed specifically for gamers. The PlayStation 4 is technically the more powerful of the two and seems to be built for purpose. Meanwhile, Microsoft has designed an all-in-one media box aimed at being a hub for the living room where the entire family can watch TV and movies and play games together. While less powerful, the Xbox One is aimed at a broader demographic, attempting to pull everyone under the Xbox umbrella for all of their media consumption. I would expect that the PlayStation 4 will come at a higher price point than the Xbox One, due mostly to the amount of raw technical power it has and the demographic that it's aiming at, while the Xbox One will be a more inexpensive, family-friendly alternative. With E3 only a couple of weeks away, we should get a better idea of the stance of both consoles at the Microsoft and Sony press events, and hopefully have enough information to revisit this topic and make an informed decision as to which system is the right one to purchase this fall. With all of that said, I have been your host Jeffrey Lazarus, and thank you for watching The Gaming Vector.